Hello everyone, welcome to my first YouTube video. Today we'll be making a succulent garden. So we're going to need a couple of silicone molds for the succulents. I do wind up using more later on in this video and I will show them as needed. Here we're going to get our measuring cups and stirrers. I use silicone ones so that I can just peel off the resin and use them later. And then I have this spoon for the mica powder and glitter. I don't use any mica powder actually, just glitter. Sorry. Here's the glitters. And I'm using some opaque dyes. And we're all set. Alright, so now that we're all ready, I'm going to be starting with this little cactus succulent mold. So first I use the glitter and I put it at the very bottom of the base, just so that we'll be able to get it right on top. And I spread it around just a little bit so that we can have a little bit of variation. I add a little bit more to get that full coverage so that we won't have anything peeking through that we don't want to. And by anything I mean the base resin. Close that up to make sure that we don't spill anything later on. And now we need our measurements. So I use epoxy resin for this type of project, which means that we have part A and part B, and they need to be equally filled. So here I show you where I'm going to put both up to. So here is the part A. You can do part A or part B first, either way. It doesn't really matter as long as they're equal. So there we go. Try to prevent any spilling. All right. And then it's time for the part B. So here you can see I filled the part A up to the 20. Now we're going to fill the part B up to the 40 so that we have equal parts. This winds up being a little bit too much, but that's okay. So here we go, part B. And again, trying not to get anything to spill. For some reason, this epoxy is really weird, and like the bee starts getting like this string that goes everywhere. It's really funny, actually. But now you just want to carefully and slowly stir to combine both parts A and B evenly. And you want to do it rather slowly so that you don't get too many bubbles. I get impatient and I wind up stirring a little faster than I probably should, but luckily we don't end up with bubbles. So once that's all combined, and I'll go a little bit longer just to be sure. When it's all combined, it appears as one solid color. When you're first mixing it, it's kind of opaque. So you know that it's fully combined and ready to use when it appears as a solid color. Here I'm trying to stir out some extra bubbles that I have created by going too fast. Alright, so now we're going to get this lighter green dye. Going to shake it thoroughly because it always tells you to shake before using. This helps combine the pigments. I was trying to get this line of dye to disappear, but it wound up never disappearing, but we still got solid color. So I suppose it's fine if you don't go absolutely berserk like I did. Alright, so here we go. This is a new dye, so I need to puncture it. And I wind up forgetting that, so I have to go grab it. And I'll be right back. Alright, and I'm back. I got a thumbtack to be able to open it with. Anything that you have will do as long as you're able to puncture the little seal that's on there. And once we're done, this was my first time using it, so I didn't know how much we would need. I started off with just a couple of drops because you would rather add too little than too much at first. You can always add more, but you can't necessarily take away. But as we begin to stir this, it turns out to be very milky and not at all solid, so I will end up adding some more because I'm just like, what? It still looks basically the same as before. Now, of course, when you're using UV dyes, you don't want to add a lot. A little will work perfectly fine, but epoxy needs a little bit more than that. My hands were sticky, so I couldn't get the lid off, and so I was struggling. But here we go. I just add a ton more. Close it back up to prevent spilling, and then begin to stir and combine the dye with the resin. Here you can see we're getting much more of a solid color, which is exactly what I wanted. I didn't want this to be translucent, I wanted it to be completely solid and opaque. So here we go. This does look slightly blue and not necessarily a completely solid green, but that was perfectly fine. Wipe off the excess resin, and there we go. Now I'm using my heat gun that I got from Resiners, and we're just going to use it on the lowest setting. We don't want to use it completely high setting, but this will help to remove any bubbles. You can also use 72% isopropyl alcohol, but I don't currently have any except for like some hand sanitizer, so I'll use that a little bit. But getting a heat gun or a torch will definitely help to remove any of those excess bubbles. Once we're all done with that, we can just go ahead and slowly pour it in. You don't want to go too fast because, again, you don't want to form air bubbles. You want to let the resin slowly get into every crevice that you need. That way, air bubbles can be reduced. Remember what I said earlier about making too much resin? That was actually for a different plant. Most of them I did actually make too much resin for, but this one I didn't. It ended up being the perfect amount. And I have a curing machine, and so now I'm just going to carefully pick it up and place it into the machine. This part was harder than I thought because the silicone mold was very, 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 very squishy, and I didn't want to spill anything out of the mold. So I ended up moving some things out of the way so that I would be able to just reach really carefully. And of course, I got the next mold that we would be using. There's the lid. And now we'll put it to cure. Alright, and now for the next little succulent that we'll be making. This time we're going to be using the darker greens, both for the glitter and for the dye. I'm using chunky glitter. You could really use anything that you want. You could use chunky glitter, fine glitter, mica powder. Oh, oh no. Well, try not to do what I did. I completely forgot that I made that mess. It was not fun to clean up. But here, I'm putting a lot more glitter than the other one because I wanted it to be on the tops of every little stem. I suppose that's the correct term. I'm not a plant person. This was a gift for my friend that I was making. So, yeah. Here again, I'm going to be filling the part A to 20 and the part B to 40. Whenever you go to wipe off any excess to prevent it from dripping, make sure that you don't touch the parts A and part B together because they will cure together. And when you put the lid back on and it's still wet, your lid will actually cure to your whatever you're using. If it's a small container or if it's a gallon like I have, it'll cure and you will have to saw that thing off. So be very careful when the parts A and part B are close to each other. Once again, we're just going to stir until it's all combined, and then we're going to add our dyes. Once again, we have to shake completely to make sure that the pigments all mix together and become uniform. This is another new one, so grabbing my thumbtack and breaking that seal. And as I learned from my last one, we're going to need more than just a couple of drops, so I just go ahead and spray a nice large amount so that I won't have to hopefully get any more. And we'll achieve that solid pigment on the first try. Using the heat gun to go remove any bubbles, although the glitter gets blown around a bit too, spreading the mess that I will have to clean up later. And we slowly pour it into the mold, making sure that everything gets mixed. The tricky part here is that the glitter also needs to be touching, and when the glitter shifts, it can create air pockets. So you have to go a little bit slower on this one than the last one because it has more glitter. Now you do wind up with extra resin that I will use in another mold. And the process is pretty repetitive from here, so I'll go ahead and speed things up. Here I just grab a whole bunch of different molds and glitters and combine them all. And I also get a little bit of glitter from the mess. But we're just trying to get rid of all this extra resin. And as you can see here on the first mold, a whole bunch of air bubbles have risen to the surface. So we'll go back and pop those with the heat gun later. Some of them I had just plain, but I'm getting more glitter for this cactus. And here we go, using the getting rid of the air bubbles with the heat gun. Sometimes it needs to be stirred just a little bit more just to make sure that it's all even. Getting rid of those last few air bubbles by pushing them to the surface and away. And now we're back. So this time we're grabbing a couple more silicone molds and we're going to be making a flowering plant. Again, this process is repetitive, so I'm going to speed things up again. This dye ends up being a lot brighter, so I need a lot less of it than compared to the previous ones. But again, I have too much, which I should have guessed because I kept on using the same measurement as the first one, even though these are a lot smaller. But for this one, I stretch it a little bit to make sure that it gets into every pocket without creating air bubbles. Here I use a little bit of the leftover green as well as the pink. And of course going through making sure that it got everywhere and that I'm removing the air bubbles. Alright, everything has been cured and now we are going to do some bean molding. Alright, so this is the first succulent that we made. You can see some of the glitter coming through on the top, but as you can see here, after just 2 hours, it is completely finished. Hard to the touch. And there we go. The glitter is definitely a lot brighter, but despite being unmixed from the resin and just being put in the silicone mold, everything is sticking really well and the shape is still noticeable. So let's go ahead and demold the rest of the succulents and see what we end up with. Alright, once we're done, we ended up with this. And of course, this is just part one. We still have to make the bowl for the actual garden and place everything together. So be sure to check back for part two. Bye!